This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Would school vouchers help or hurt education in the area? A conversation with two key players in that debate tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. We're joined tonight for a conversation about school vouchers and education. First, Bill Dries, reporter with the Memphis Daily News. Chris Caldwell, a commissioner for the Countywide School Board. Eleanor Boudreau, reporter with WKNO-FM. And Brian Kelsey, state senator from Germantown, Shelby County. Thank you all for being here. We'll start with a school voucher, or school scholarships, as I think you're calling it, Senator Kelsey. It's one of the key tenets nationwide for people trying to reform schools. Memphis and Tennessee have been a hotbed for school reform, right or wrong, be it charter schools, be it changes to teacher tenure and so on. There's been talk for the last few years about a voucher bill. It looks like this year it's going to get proposed. Why don't we start, if you would just give us the background on the bill as it's, I know it hasn't been filed, but what that proposal is apt to look like.
Well, the great news that we learned just recently is that Governor Haslam is going to propose an opportunity scholarship bill as part of his administrative package for this year. So that is really exciting. And the basic premise is this, that we spend over $9,000 per student here in the Memphis area. And so why not give parents a choice on where that $9,000 is spent? And let's give these children hope and choice so that they can take the $9,000 as a scholarship to whatever other public or private school they would like their children to attend.
And am I right in this, just to kind of simplify, the proposal doesn't have all its detail yet, but the kind of key criteria that people who talk about vouchers, and you were part of the governor's task force, which met all last year, is eligibility. How is a kid eligible? Is it based on income? Is it based on them being in a failing school or some combination? What private schools would be eligible to take those vouchers and in what way? Accountability and measurement, how you measure the schools, and are they doing a good job? Are the kids getting a better or equivalent education? And then how much money? You just talked about $9,000, but there's been some discussion about that. Are those kind of the key things that have to be really defined as this goes forward?
You really have hammered out all the key questions that have to be answered by the legislature and by the governor in terms of what sort of proposal that he is going to place on us. But yes, this will be a program that will be focused on low-income children, and my personal hope is that we can cover as many low-income children as possible in Tennessee.
Okay. And Commissioner Caldwell, you have concerns about this proposal. Why?
Well, I wouldn't say at this point I have concerns because all the items that you mentioned have not been laid out. So I think it's a noble cause, and I think that it's very important that we reach these kids. And any concerns I would have is just that which is what happens with a lot of legislation. It's good intentions, unintended consequences. So to the extent that we can mitigate any negative consequences to the kids in public education, that's my main concern, and I'm fully willing to work with the state, and so that this does have the effect they want it to have.
One of the biggest concerns that people have, critics of voucher programs nationwide, maybe one of those unintended consequences you reference, is that they tend to take, critics say, the best of they cream. They take the best students out. The most involved parents are going to go through the process of applying and getting that voucher and moving on. People have the same criticism of charter schools, and that part of the consequence of that is that the schools that are left tend to be the historically underperforming schools are now left with even a tougher go, because you've got the lowest performing students, maybe still low income students, parents that aren't involved. Let's say that the voucher program works, Senator Kelsey, for the people you're targeting and it gets them into better schools. What about the kids that are left that aren't able to get into a charter school or get a voucher and are just kind of at the bottom?
Well, as you mentioned, Eric, we hear these arguments all the time. We heard them in the charter school debate, and they're simply not true. They don't come about. We know that in every single state that has put in place an opportunity scholarship bill, in every single instance, the test scores of those students who remain in the public schools have increased every time across the board.
And why is that?
Well, I mean, it's very simple. It's because you're introducing competition into this equation, and now that those public schools have to compete to continue to receive students from those parents, then they've got to provide a better product for the students who choose to remain there.
And Commissioner Caldwell, that idea of competition, I think Chris Barbick from the state, I think Kevin Huffman, the state director of education, they've talked a lot about competition. Is that a good thing?
I think it is. I think that it's, if there's a level playing field, and to your point earlier about accountability, and are these, is it an apple-to-apples comparison? Particularly in charter schools, they are judged by the same test. So I don't know that every private institution takes a TCAP test. And then the other item that we've found results is that one of the most important factors in the quality of education is the teacher in the classroom. So is there going to be a system where the teachers are evaluated as well? So,
in the private school where
yes,
this voucher money is going.
Yes.
Right.
So,
right.
It's just, and to the point of choice, it needs to be educated choice, and the only way a parent is going to be able to make that educated choice if it's clear and transparent. So I'm hopeful that those kind of things will be addressed, and I applaud Senator Kelsey because he's been a champion of this initiative, and I think if it's implemented properly and it has the results that they want, I think it'll be a good thing.
Okay.
Senator Kelsey, let's talk about income guidelines because that seems to be a key factor in this. Governor Haslam this week said this is absolutely going to be a proposal that targets low-income families in schools that are low performing. Lieutenant Governor Ramsey, on the other hand, said that he sees no reason why this couldn't extend to middle-income families, that there is a need there too. Where is the income threshold going to fall in this bill?
Well, we still don't know exactly what Governor Haslam is going to propose for low-income children, but it has always been a focus on low-income children. If you did, these bills, as they've passed in other states, have been anywhere from free and reduced lunch eligible students, which would be $42,000 roughly for a family of 4 in annual income, up to the Indiana bill, which I tend to think was an excellent piece of legislation, which was 300% of the poverty level, more like $68,000 a year in annual income for a family of 4.
What is the impact on private education? We've talked about the impact on public education, but what happens with private schools here, and are there private schools that materialize solely because of the availability of vouchers?
There's going to be some of both. We obviously have a lot of private schools here in Shelby County, and so we are very blessed in that way, and as opposed to a lot of rural counties in Tennessee that this bill probably will not have much of an effect on. But those schools, you see that most of these students end up going to schools that focus on low-income children. I'm thinking about schools like Brinkley Heights Academy, a neighborhood school in the Binghamton area, these types of schools, some of our Jubilee schools that are run by the Catholic Diocese here. Those are schools that focus on low-income children. They'll probably take the vast majority of the students, but some of your more upper echelon private schools hopefully will participate as well, and they can actually start to provide some real diversity in their student bodies.
Should they have to take the entire amount from the voucher? Should that be the entire payment that the student's family has to make?
Well, I think some of these schools require a nominal fee. I mean, for example, $50 a semester or $50 a month. And I think it is important that some of these schools feel in their mission statement to have some sort of buy-in from the parents. I don't have a problem with that nominal figure, but the task force did decide that they want to make the scholarship amount to be virtually the whole amount that can be charged.
So a school at the high end of MUS or St. Mary's or something like that, which are kind of viewed as the highest performing private schools where the tuition is maybe $18,000, $19,000. If they're going to take one of these kids, they're going to have to take only the amount of the voucher plus some sort of nominal fee. They can't charge the parent another $9,000 on top of that.
That's exactly right. But what they can do is they can expand from one student receiving one full $18,000 scholarship, as they're giving right now, to now 2 students who are each receiving a $9,000 privately funded scholarship plus the $9,000
right, and they can supplement it with their internal funds. Let me go back to the issue, and I'll get Eleanor in here. But Commissioner Caldwell, people criticize or had concerns about the charter school program that it would take the money out of the public schools, because that money travels with the kid, with the student over to the charter school, but that the bulk of the standard school, the traditional school, whatever that means these days, still had overhead, still had teachers, still had all these expenses, and that you're gutting, that the charter schools would gut the schools of necessary funds. Is that happened? Is it that your experience, or is the board seeing that, yeah, actually we're gutting the schools of money with the charter schools and then even further with the vouchers?
Well, I think it's two things. It is a diminishment of funds that come to the public school system, and as you said, you cannot offset every dollar that leaves, because you still have to have teachers in the classroom, and then it's not spread over as many students. But you know, the other concern is one of the biggest expenses in education is staffing. So to the extent that we don't know where these kids are going to come from in enough time to make sure that the staffing numbers are correct, because it would be just like in any business, you don't want to make your assumptions for a budget you know, one way, and then in the middle of the year find out that there was a mistake. So that was my point about mitigating any negative impact. And I think a lot of that could be achieved you know, by collaborating with the school systems that this is going to affect. Now, in this instance, it's primarily going to affect Achievement School District. So I would think that, but I also think there's some chance that it could affect some of us, or some of the kids in public schools in Memphis as well.
Okay.
Yeah, when I think of education reform, I think of it that, you know, there's a short game, but there's also a long game. So 50 years down the road, Senator Kelsey, are the majority of kids in Memphis and Shelby County going to be going to district schools, or are they going to be taking vouchers and going to private schools or charters or something else?
That's a good question. It's an often misunderstood answer as well. And the answer is the vast majority of our children are always going to remain in the public school system. We know that because these programs have now been in place since 1990, which was the first one in Wisconsin. So in the first few years, you're only going to see a 1 or 2% participation rate among eligible students. Even in a fully robust program that's 10 or 20 years old, you're still going to see probably only 15% at the most, a percentage of students who are eligible who are taking advantage of this. That leaves 85% of the students in the public schools. We obviously still have to continue to focus on those children as well.
Commissioner Caldwell, let me kind of ask the other side of the coin on that. Is the traditional job of a school system changing from actually running a system to being a platform for multiple options?
Well, apparently here, you know, obviously here it has become that, and I think it's even gotten to a bigger extreme in Louisiana, where the board has actually just become an authorizer. So that's changing, but I also think we have to look at the way education is delivered, you know, the skill sets that we are trying to train these kids for, because if you look at how education has evolved, you know, the One Best School System, we were basically, and we leapfrogged the rest of the world, but we were training people basically for factory jobs and to have enough education to be able to vote. Mm-hmm. Well, now those skill sets that then afforded somebody a subsistent or a good you know, income level is no longer true. So I think it's incumbent on anybody that's interested in getting the kids where they need to get, that they you know, expand their horizon and the way they look at these things, so that we are training the kids, you know, for the future, because that's what our obligation is to those children.
How critical is whether or not the local share of funding also moves with those children? It's a question for both of you, but Commissioner Caldwell, how critical is that local share to continuing to do what the school system does now?
Well, I think that, again, it goes back to, you know, obviously there's some infrastructure that's already, you know, the school system already has. So just like any business, when you want to change your business model, you can't, you know, there's a time lag. So those costs won't go away overnight, and to the extent that can be accommodated, I think that lessens what you're talking about. But then there's also other funds, you know, that Title I funds and other things that would follow the kid that also, so it can't just be, you know, just about the local funds, because, you know, that's the others are going to you know, follow the kids as well.
Let's go through those details, Senator Kelsey. So the task force talked through a couple things. There's the state amount of money that goes to a child, which varies, I think, through the state. Then there's the local match. What is your ideal scenario for this proposal in terms of how much of the money state, local, et cetera, travels with the child?
I don't think we should reinvent the wheel on this. We already have this this question solved in the charter school option, and the idea is that we should have the full 100% per pupil expenditure of our state funding BEP formula, which is again around $9,200 in Memphis.
Okay, and that number varies by county, varies by area, so that gets away from the issue of some private schools being more expensive in, say, the cities in Tennessee, less so in the rural areas.
That's right, and in fact, and this is where you see how the public schools end up with actually more money per pupil, is because a lot of these schools that I mentioned earlier are very low-cost schools, and they may only cost $5,200 to attend. And if that's the case, this bill would actually cap the scholarship amount at $5,200. Well, that $4,000 difference would then go back to the public school system and increase their per pupil expenditures.
And when you talk about vouchers, you know, at some simplest level, let's picture we're talking about kids in achievement school districts and poverty level or 300 times the poverty level and so on. What about the person who middle income is maybe has their kid in private school, is paying property taxes, you know, $5,000, $6,000 a year, the bulk of which really goes to education. This doesn't really do anything for them. Do you hear from people? You represent an area of Tennessee that's higher income. I mean, are those people going to be knocking on your door saying, well, that's all well and good, but what about me? I'm paying taxes and tuition. I want some help too.
Well, I certainly think from a fairness standpoint, they make a very good argument. And yes, I do hear from a lot of those people every day. But my focus and the governor's focus is really on low-income children. And I think that any sort of program that we start in Tennessee needs to be focused on increasing educational options for low-income children.
But do you see that program expanding to a higher and higher income level?
Only if it's successful. If it's not successful, then certainly not. But yes, if it's successful, why not open it up to more children?
And what do you think about that? If it goes across, and I'm speculating here, but if it opens the door, and this is one of those things that people say, you know, that person in Midtown and Germantown or wherever they are, who's again a middle income person who feels like they need to pay private school tuition, but they're also paying property taxes. Should this program eventually be expanded to them?
Well, I think the risk you run with that is that you decrease the likelihood that the people that take advantage of it are the lower income kids, because beyond the tuition, there are other hurdles like transportation costs, time factors, because their location to a private school, and for instance, somebody that has a set schedule that they have to be at work, they can't travel 30, 45 minutes to get their kid to a school and then do it again at the end of the day. So it's not just about dollars. And then, you know, again, I think we have to make sure the focus has to be on what we're doing this for, I assume, is academic achievement. And I think there's still some diverse opinions about what the final verdict is on that. That when you take into account socioeconomic factors, that there is dispute between different studies, that really is an improvement. So I mean, but these are things that if we work them out and you know everybody's convinced that we've addressed that, then you really have a strong program that does what it's supposed to do.
Okay.
Okay.
Eleanor.
Senator Kelsey, what kinds of accountability is there going to be for these private institutions that are now getting public funds to make sure that they are indeed providing great education?
That's a good question. There definitely has to be accountability built into this program and into this bill, and we will do that. On the academic accountability side, a lot of these private schools are already giving an end-of-year test, and I think we definitely need to require that of them so that we can figure out what sort of value is being added to the education of these children who attend those private schools. As well, we've got to have financial accountability. We've talked about bonding requirements in the past in these bills, and I also hope that we will move forward with financial information reporting also so that we know exactly where these dollars are going.
Yeah, and end-of-year test, is that going to be the TCAP or is something different? Are they going to be measured by different standards than public schools are measured by?
Well, Tennessee is actually moving away from the TCAP after this coming year. So I don't think we want to tie anything to the TCAP because it's going away. But I do think it's important to have an end-of-year test. And in fact, most of these end-of-year tests are moving toward a Common Core type of standard. So I really think this issue is not going to be an issue at all 5 years down the road. In the meantime, we are going to have to require some sort of end-of-year test.
Commissioner Caldwell, you had a comment on that.
Well, it was to the point to the TCAP, because you know I think it's interesting the state's moving away from that, and because I've had concerns about whether the TCAP really measures is a great measure of a kid's ability academically or their intelligence. So, you know, we find these schools being identified as and the kids not being achievers. So now we move away from that. So, but as long as it's the same test, because to that extent, you know, how you administer a test and the way the questions are asked can determine how a child performs on that. And also, you know, with children, it depends on what frame of mind they are in that day. So, you know, to me, it's absolutely critical that it be the exact same test, because you know scores don't always extrapolate equally or exactly.
What happens, by the way, if let's say someone fails that test and they've got a voucher and they're in a private school and they're not performing at whatever that baseline is that kid sent back to his or her underperforming public school?
Well, first of all, there's accountability inherently built into a school choice bill, because the parents have the choice then to send that student back if that student is not performing well. And so that's the one major advantage that you have in a private school over a public school. You're not forced to go there. But yes, if particular schools are failing large percentages of the students that they are receiving on the scholarship, then at a certain point I think it's reasonable to ask of those schools that they be eliminated from the voucher program.
Yeah, if a small amount of children, you know, you said maybe 1% in the first year are going to make use of the voucher bill if it passes, will you really be able to tell if it's working? You know, if it's a few hundred to 1,000 kids, that's not very many.
Yeah, certainly you want larger numbers to be able to really make a decision. So that's why I don't think anyone's going to try to start eliminating schools after year one if the school only took 3 scholarship students, for example. But on down the road, it is important to have those accountability measures in there.
Your take on that, Commissioner Caldwell?
I think the accountability measures are extremely important, but in terms of the choice, you know, I think studies have shown that when a parent makes a conscious decision to put their kid in the school, they're less likely to be critical of their own decision. So you know, it's not so much that the parent would then immediately realize, and then if the tests aren't the same, then what measures do they use? And so and then finally, back to your previous question, what about kids that you know have special needs and special education kids?
Right.
So if in a scenario where most of the kids that are leaving are not special ed kids, then you have a public district here that has kids that it is very expensive to educate. So
and very expensive to hire for, very difficult. I mean, those are the kind of kids, I mean, if you talk to teachers or look at surveys, that's where you lose a lot of teachers is they go in there, they want to work with the hardest kids, but it's a grind, it's difficult. And that kind of goes back to the original question. I talked to someone who's involved in education reform in Memphis who said the bad side of this is if it works as you described, and you end up leaving these really difficult kids, special needs, you know, special ed, no parental involvement, getting teachers to work on to educate them is going to be incredibly difficult.
Yes, and that was my original statement. I'm not complaining, but these are the kind of things, the details that need to be worked out on the front end before we go into a program, because they have long-lasting impact.
Yeah,
just really quickly, I would love to have the Memphis City Schools and the Unified Board's support of a special needs voucher program as well. In fact, that's something that we will be pursuing in the legislative side, separate and apart from the governor's bill.
Getting just a couple minutes left here, Bill.
Commissioner, I wanted to make sure I heard you correctly earlier. You think that a voucher program would have an immediate impact on the Achievement School District? Did I hear you correctly?
No, I don't think I said. I think you know, since it's directed to kids that are in the Achievement School District, obviously it would have an impact. You know, the amount of that, you know, and the severity of it, you know, that's above my ability to assess at this point.
Okay, the school board had a decision to make on a large number of charter schools. And a finding that those schools posed a financial hardship. Could there be a similar finding if we have a lot of schools here who take vouchers? Would that be part of the mechanism in terms of it?
Well, I think we you know it's the degree of the financial hardship. But you know, if that's in the equation on the front end, I think that's. And I'm hopeful that the state is also looking at that because, you know, I think it's the same discussion we had about municipals, that one move shouldn't disadvantage another district. So if we're all in this for the best for the kids, then it should be for all the kids.
Let me, as we just have a couple minutes left, let me shift gears just slightly. Senator Kelsey, there's a lot of talk the state's going to get more involved in charter schools. I don't know that you're directly involved in this, but you've had resistance in some districts, Memphis to some degree. Shelby County schools resisted charter schools. The state is making a priority. Nashville, somewhat famously now, has really fought one charter school coming in. Do you see the state getting more involved in authorizing and maybe an appeals board or something when charter schools can't move into districts?
Yes, absolutely. I see the state doing that this year, and I hope that we will pass that bill. States that have successful charter school programs have a statewide authorizer, a board full of people who are really looking out for what's best for children that authorize these schools on the front end. Otherwise, you've got the fox guarding the hen house.
Okay, and so you see that going forward. Is that a bill you're going to take? Or
that is not a bill that I will personally be sponsoring.
And let me shift also, still on education. Kreiner Cash in the last week or so has said that he's going to be moving on. Your thoughts on Kreiner Cash's tenure? Is it time for him to go? Is this the right move? And we don't have a lot of time left, but.
Well, I think he has done quite a few good things for the district. I think he identified areas that now you're seeing nationally have been identified as where, if you want to reform and you want to have, lift these kids, their academic achievement quickly, he's identified those things. So I think there are a lot of good things that have happened while he's been here, and, wish him well.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you, Senator Kelsey, Bill, Eleanor. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week. Good night.